Hello students, I am Dr. Nidhi Sharma here again with a new lecture video. In the previous lecture, we studied about the cell membrane, the structure of the cell membrane, the fluid and mosaic model as you're seeing here. Okay, so this was the two lipid bilayer as you are seeing, and this lipid bilayer has having two ends. One is polar hydrophilic ends and another is hydrophobic non-polar hydrophobic ends. Non-polar hydrophobic end is in the middle of the this lipid bilayer, while the hydrophilic end is towards the outer end of the cell membrane. So this was we studied the structure of the cell membrane. This was given by Singer and Nicholson. Okay, now the next topic which we will study about is the fluidity of the membrane. It is the fluidity of membrane. Okay, now fluidity of the membrane. The fluid nature of the membrane is important from the point of view of interaction of molecules within the membrane as well as other functions like formation of intercellular junctions, cell growth, secretion, endocytosis. So this plasma membrane is fluid in nature, okay. Now it provides what? Fluidity. Now this fluidity helps in certain important functions. What are the functions which are carried out by plasma membrane, and the fluidity of the plasma membrane supports these functions. First function is what? Interaction of molecules within the membrane. Interaction of molecules within the membrane. Okay, so interaction of molecules within the membrane. Okay, the second one, formation of intercellular junction. Formation of intercellular junction. Formation of intercellular junctions. Okay, formation of intercellular junctions. Then cell growth. Another function is what? It helps in cell growth. The fluidity of the cell membrane helps in cell growth. Then we can say secretion of any particular substances. Then another one is endocytosis. What do you mean by here endocytosis? Endocytosis means taking of food by the cell. So the taking of food by the cell is called as endocytosis, and it is enhanced by the fluid nature of the plasma membrane. Okay, then another is cell division. So cell membrane also helps in cell division. So the fluidity of the plasma membrane carries out these following functions. First is interaction of molecule within the membrane, formation of intercellular junctions, cell growth, secretion, endocytosis, and the cell division. Okay, so these were the functions which is carried out by plasma membrane. Now the passage of substances. The passage of substances across the membrane, across the plasma membrane, follows by two methods. It is by two methods. Okay, it is by two methods. The first method is active transport. The first method is active transport, and the second method is the passive transport. Okay, so the passage of substances through the plasma membrane is of two types: active transport and passive transport. Now we'll study about the active transport. Active transport is the movement of the molecules across the membrane against their concentration gradient, that is from lower to the higher concentration. What is active transport? It is the transport of the molecules. It is the transport of the molecules from the region of its lower concentration from the region of its lower concentration to higher concentration. Okay, so this is the active transport. What is active transport? Transport of certain molecules from the region of its lower concentration to higher concentration across the plasma membrane. So this is called as active transport. Okay, now this active transport is an energy dependent process. It is what? An energy. It is an energy dependent. It is an energy dependent process. And since it's an energy dependent process, it uses what? ATP. Okay, since it's an energy dependent process, therefore what does it uses? ATP. The full form of ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so this active transport, it occurs in few ions. And molecules. Example is what? The sodium pump or the potassium pump. So the transfer of the sodium ions and the potassium ions across the plasma membrane is by active transport, that is from the region of its lower concentration to the region of its higher concentration. And this active transport needs energy, which it takes from ATP. The full form of ATP here is adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so the polar molecules, they require a carrier protein of the membrane to facilitate their transport across the membrane. So these molecules, what do they require? These molecules, they require the carrier protein, a carrier protein. Okay, it requires the molecules, these require a carrier protein of the membrane which facilitate the transport across the membrane. Okay, because these ions, they cannot pass through the non-polar lipid bilayer. So there are certain carrier proteins which carry these ions from the region of its lower concentration to the region of its high concentration. Okay, with the help of the energy which is taken up from ATP. Okay, so this was the active transport. Now the next type of transport which we will study about is the passive transport. It is the passive transport. Okay, this is the passive transport. Now what is passive transport? It is a mode of movement of molecules or substances across the membrane without any requirement of energy. It is what? It is the movement of molecules. It is the movement of molecules across the plasma membrane, across the plasma membrane without the requirement of energy, so this is the passive transport, the transport of molecules across the plasma membrane without the requirement of any energy. It can be further following three types. First is osmosis. Okay. Then second is simple diffusion. And the third one is the facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion. So the passive transport can take place through osmosis, simple diffusion, and facilitated diffusion. Now, what is this osmosis? Osmosis is the process by which the water molecules pass through the membrane from the region of its higher concentration to the region of its lower concentration. This is what osmosis. Water molecules passes from the region of its higher concentration to the lower concentration. Okay, this is what osmosis. Okay, now the second is the simple diffusion. Now, what is this simple diffusion? It is a process in which the neutral molecules move across the membrane along the concentration gradient, that is from higher concentration to the lower concentration. Example, gases and some molecules. What is this simple diffusion? It is a process, simple diffusion. It is the process in which the molecules passes from the region of its higher concentration to its lower concentration across the membrane. Okay, for example is gases and some molecules Okay, so this was about the simple diffusion. Now we have the facilitated diffusion. What is this facilitated diffusion? It is a process in which the molecules are transported along the concentration gradient by the help of ion channels and permeases. Okay, so again, this is facilitated diffusion. It is the movement of molecules. It is the movement of the molecules from the region of its higher concentration to its lower concentration. Okay, and this movement is facilitated by certain ion channels and permeases. So energy is not required in this process. So these were the active transport and the passive transport. Now we'll just look at the table, the difference between the active and the passive transport. Now, active transport, in this process energy is required, while in the passive transport no energy is required. Active transport, it's a rapid process. Passive, it is comparatively slower process. Okay, now active transport occurs usually against the concentration gradient, while passive occurs along the concentration gradient. Active transport is highly selective, passive is non-selective. Active transport it requires carrier protein, while passive it occurs without carrier protein. So this is the basic difference between the active transport and the passive transport, which is shown by the cell membrane. Okay. Now, what are the functions of the cell membrane? What are the functions of the cell membrane? Firstly, it is a selectively permeable membrane or semi-permeable membrane. Selectively permeable membrane or semi-permeable membrane means it allows only certain particles to pass through the membrane. Okay. It protects the cell from injury. Membranes, they have the carrier protein for the active transport. Cell membrane, they contain enzymes which perform certain reaction on their surface, example ATPase and the phosphatase. So these were the functions of the cell membrane. Cell membrane, they contain certain enzymes which perform certain reaction on their surface, example ATPase and the phosphatase. So this was all about the cell membrane. Now we will talk about the next topic. We will discuss the next topic, that is the cell wall. The cell wall. Firstly, there is a cell membrane and then you find the cell wall. The cell wall is found only in plant cell. Okay. The cell wall is only found in the plant cell. It was first discovered by Robert Hooke. Discovered by Robert Hooke. Discovered by Robert Hooke in 1665. So it was first discovered by Robert Hooke in 1665. It is a rigid and a non-living structure. Rigid and non-living structure. Non-living structure. So it is a rigid and non-living structure which forms an outer covering of the plasma membrane. Okay, it is found in plants, and cell wall is absent in the case of animal cells. Now we'll study about the structure of the cell wall. The structure of cell wall. Structure of cell wall. See, the wall is differentiated into following three parts. Cell wall is differentiated into three parts. Okay, it is differentiated into three parts. First is the middle lamellae. Middle lamellae. Then second is the primary cell wall. And second is the secondary cell wall. So the cell wall is divided into three parts: middle lamellae, primary cell wall and secondary cell wall. Now this middle lamellae, it is the layer which is mainly made up of calcium and magnesium pectates. It is made up of calcium. We can say made up of calcium and magnesium pectates. Okay, it is made up of calcium and magnesium pectate, and it cements the cell wall. This middle lamellae, it is found between the two cell walls of the two adjoining cells. Okay, middle lamellae is found between the two adjoining cell walls. It is absent on the outer side of the surface cell middle lamellae along with the cell wall traversed by plasmodesmata. It is absent on the outer side of the surface cell. Okay, and it is traversed by plasmodesmata which connects the cytoplasm of two neighboring cells. Now what is plasmodesmata? What is this plasmodesmata? These are the intercellular connections which connects the two cytoplasm of the neighboring cells. Okay, which connects the two cytoplasm of the neighboring cells. So this is the plasmodesmata. These are the intercellular connections which join the two cytoplasm of the adjoining or the neighboring cells. Okay. Then we will talk about the primary cell wall. Now this primary cell wall is produced inner to the middle lamella in a young and growing cell. It is produced inner to the middle lamella. It is capable of growth and extension. It tends to diminish gradually as the cell attains maturity. This is the primary cell wall. Then the secondary cell wall. This is the secondary cell wall. This secondary cell wall is a thick. It is thick. Okay, it is thick secondary wall, and it is formed inner towards the inner membrane. It is formed inner towards the membrane to the primary cell wall. To the inner of the primary cell wall, this secondary cell wall is found, which is what? Thick. Okay, which is what? Thick. So thick secondary wall is formed inner towards the membrane to the primary wall. As the cell gets fully matured, the composition is similar to the primary wall. As the cell gets matured, the function of secondary wall is similar to the function of the primary cell wall. Okay. Now this was about the structure of the cell wall. Now we'll study about the functions of the cell wall. First function is what? It helps in providing. Cell wall gives a definite shape to the cell, and it also protects the protoplasm against any mechanical injury. Against any mechanical injury. It helps in cell-to-cell interaction. The cell wall helps in cell-to-cell interaction through plasmodesmata. It provides barrier to undesirable macromolecules and the attack of pathogens. Pathogens are the disease-causing microorganisms. So these microorganisms are not allowed to attack the cell by the help of the cell wall. Okay, and this cell wall, it provides barrier to the undesirable macromolecule. Undesirable macromolecule cannot enter the cell because of the cell wall. Okay, and this cell wall also helps in cell to cell interaction through what? Plasmodesmata, which are the intercellular connections which connects the two cytoplasm of the neighboring cell. So this was about the functions of the cell membrane and the composition of the cell wall and the function of the cell wall. So this much is in this lecture. Students, if you find my lecture informative and interesting, please subscribe to my channel. Okay, like my channel and subscribe my channel. Thank you.